My name is Gerard Oosterwijk. I'm not from Sweden, I'm from Brussels. I work for the Foundation of European Progressive Study. It's a think tank of the European Social Democrats. And we're here today as part of our digital program that we did with the Nordics. And we have a nice program with a fresh Nobel Prize laureate, leader of the opposition, and several researchers. We're going to talk you. I'll talk you through the program later. But to introduce the work that we've been doing, we have two opening speakers. We have Christina Birke-Daniels from the FES Nordics, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, to come up. And we have Simon Winge, Chief Economist of the Akademikerförbundet SSR. So please, welcome and good luck.
Thank you, Sarah. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and dear Magdalena Andersson, former Prime Minister of Sweden, dear Daron Acemoglu, Nobel laureate, our guests of honor. I'm delighted to warmly welcome you all on behalf of a consortium of progressive think tanks, which has, with the support of the Nordic trade unions, established the very first Nordic digital program on algorithmic management. Over the past 2 years, we have been systematically examining the far-reaching implications of this management across the Nordic region, a central, in some ways, exhilarating aspect of our modern work landscape. And I'm very excited we will dive deeply into it today. Our collaboration is firmly rooted in the robust tradition of SAMAK, the Cooperation Committee of the Nordic Labour Movement, which has been a driving force in fostering this invaluable exchange between social democrats, trade unions, and I'm very happy to see the former Secretary General who initiated this program also here with us today. As a German political foundation, we were extremely honored to be part of this. We join the mission, we share mutual values of social justice, freedom, solidarity, and overall democracy. And therefore, we join the concert of those asking ourselves the question, how can we make algorithmic management inclusive? How can we make it pro-workers? And today, at this crossroad of technology, labor, and social policy, we are really at the crucial moment. Maybe it's like when the electricity came to the houses, who knows? And we have seen the pace of these discussions picking up in the Nordic countries, also at government level. But as think tanks, we feel we need to make it more accessible to all the people. Therefore, we are extremely grateful to have wonderful experts here today, also to carry this important subject to a broader audience and discuss the issue with. We are extremely grateful to the Foundation of European Progressive Studies in Brussels for their invaluable coordination of the project and also for taking these progressive issues at European level. This is the final conference of this year's program, so there's a long list to thank all the authors, scientists, trade unions, and of course all the staff members, especially from FEPS. Please accept my thanks. This has been a really great project. We are delighted to welcome Daron Acemoglu, who will contribute invaluable insights to this discussion. We think that both his research and ours show really how these new technologies impact workers, jobs, and the overall labor dynamic. And our study kind of takes it hands down to the shop floor, which we'll explore later on, and hopefully therefore makes it even more accessible. Thank you for underlining how crucial institutions are, and hopefully we can be part of these institutions that guarantee, through always asking the question, that we can identify opportunities for workers and for institutions. It's crucially, I think, for any socially minded policymakers, such as social democrats, but hopefully also others, for labor movements, but also for us all in a society to develop strategies to ensure that technological change benefits us all.
Dear friends, we've been through a plague, right? A plague of asking ChatGPT to write our openings of seminars. I hope we are through this plague. We might be at the other side of this plague. And this other side might be this. I suggest if an AI was running my department, I would be fired by now, right? Why is this? I mean, I've scored terribly on my metrics the last few weeks. I haven't been answering emails promptly, maybe not even properly or at all. You know, the meetings I'm scheduled in, I haven't been attending all of them. I might have been late, etc. I might have been among the lowest 10% in my corporation on the performance metrics. And this is, of course, because I've been busy on the phone with all the amazing people coming here today. And it could be seen as a silly joke, but you know, the technology is here to do this. The data is gathered today, and it's used also in Sweden, which we will hear from some of our researchers here today. And it worries me as a trade unionist. And I think many of you in this room think this will not happen to me, right? I mean, I have a college degree, I have an independent employment, I'm a strong person, but you know, the corporations who run this software, they are household names. I mean, the algorithmic management systems are made by Oracle. They are well known from the West Coast in Sweden at the moment. We have SAP, and of course, ubiquitous Microsoft. And they all brag that we can integrate this in our Teams, in our Outlook system, and in Office 365, the algorithmic management tools. And this worries me, not only because it risks make your jobs shit, right? Sorry. But also because, to paraphrase Mr. Acemoglu, it also does not seem to increase productivity. So it makes us more miserable, but not more productive. So that should worry, I think, all of us. But of course, the laureate also has some optimistic notes, and the researcher will also show this, that how the trade unions tackle this issue will also affect how it's actually implemented and how productivity comes out at the other end. So with that, I want to welcome Mr. Acemoglu on stage. Welcome, and you will speak for a little while, and then we also present, after that, we welcome Magdalena Andersson on stage.
Perfect.
You stand now, and then we sit together.
I'll just get a glass of water, and then, and then I'm ready to speak. Thank you, Simon. Thanks very much. Should I get started?
Please, when you
Perfect.
when
Yes.
like.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and thanks to all of you being here. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I'm looking forward to my conversation with Magdalena as well. Simon, you will be pleased to know that I would be in the same boat as you. I might be fired by an algorithm. I have also been neglecting my emails. I missed some of the meetings that I said I would attend. I haven't been around the last few weeks, so I think we're in the same boat. And then you would also be pleased to know that the word that you use, which is a little risque, it's actually now entered the lexicon. Cory Doctorow refers to it, to what AI does, as enshittification. So you're in good company. So algorithms are everywhere, but not always as bad as Simon and I just made it sound like. There are enormous number of things that algorithms do already. We depend on them. And the possibilities are quite wide, even if not endless. Our lives are going to depend more and more on information. And today, information comes mostly via algorithmic ways of manipulating, analyzing data, and many of the goods and services that you use are essentially dependent on algorithms as well. So why worry? Well, there are very good reasons to worry, because algorithms, just like any technology, are tools, and how they are used will determine who benefits, who loses, and how much damage they do to many things that we care about, including shared prosperity and democracy. So to put this into perspective, let me take a couple of steps back, and I will come back to algorithmic governance at the end, but hopefully the stage that I set will be useful for appreciating the perspective that I want to share on this. Automation, broadly construed, which includes a lot of algorithms and now a lot of AI, does many things. And unfortunately, many of them are not always good for labor. So automation, by its nature, is the substitution of capital, machinery, algorithms for tasks previously performed by labor, so which means that it partially sidelines labor. So you depend less on labor because fewer of the things that were essentially using labor now require labor. As a result, as long ago commented even by Karl Marx, who of course didn't see much of modern day automation, automation is bad for worker power. So that's true for organized and unorganized worker power, but I think in this room people care about organized labor power a lot, and that has a direct negative effect. It doesn't mean it's the end of labor movement, and I'm going to talk about that, but when companies think that they can get away without worker cooperation, without worker involvement, that of course is going to reduce the effective power of workers. The theory I have worked on a lot, and the evidence I have worked on a lot as well, is that automation is also bad for labor share, meaning that it reduces the share of value-added output that goes to labor because more stuff is done by capital. And even though there are some indirect effects, for example, you may need more workers doing the non-automated tasks, the sum total of these forces very, very, very generally reduces the labor share. So inequality, at least one dimension of inequality, is going to increase as a result of automation. What about wages? Well, the theory is quite ambiguous on that. It doesn't say that wages or employment should increase because of automation, even though automation is a technological change that expands our capabilities. In fact, even when automation increases productivity, it may reduce wages. And this is particularly so, and Simon already hinted at that, for what I refer to as socio-automation, meaning automation that doesn't really create very significant productivity benefits. So if you had workers doing customer calls and they were quite good at it, they understood the job, they were adaptable, and then now you put a cheap online automated system, that's not going to revolutionize a company's productivity. It may save a few bucks for the company. Sometimes it may actually make the company face costs that it did not anticipate. Sometimes it may reduce customer satisfaction. Sometimes it may enable the company to expand operations a little bit. But in all of these cases, it's source automation. It's not like a huge deal. But it is a huge deal for workers because now you're getting the sidelining, you're getting the workers losing tasks, and you don't have the productivity gains to make up for it. But all of this doesn't mean doom and gloom in general, because we use technology, including algorithmic technology, for doing something else. We could create, and we do sometimes create, new tasks for workers. Most of the things that workers do today, both in offices and in the shop floor, were tasks that did not exist, or they, even if they existed, such as machine operation, they were completely different with a very different set of machines and very different set of responsibilities. So the additional new, more sophisticated tasks were the outcome of technology being used, but in a somewhat more pro-worker way. And it's not just technology, it's the surrounding ecosystem organizations and choices. So a lot of the labor disputes everywhere around the world, including the United States, were often about training of workers for new machinery. That's essential for workers to be able to take on and perform productively new tasks. And of course, new tasks also depend on what firms do. For instance, when you introduce robots or numerically controlled and computer controlled machinery for taking over certain welding tasks, do you take the welders and train them up to be inspectors or design workers or other technical occupations? So those are very much related to new tasks. And the reason why I am going through this is to underscore two very important points, in my opinion. One is that it is incorrect to think of algorithms, AI, and more broadly digital technologies as, by their nature, being biased against labor. They are opening up new possibilities. Some of them, such as automation, especially so-so automation, so especially excessive automation, would be quite bad for labor. But they could also be used for new tasks. And if that's the case, they need not be bad. In fact, they could be quite good, because new tasks could generate both greater production opportunities, greater wages, and more important essential roles for labor. Second, I want to emphasize that there is a very simple metric that we could sort of keep at the back of our minds when we think of the role of unions, for example, and the future of algorithms in this, is that this the balance between these new tasks and automation. If you overemphasize automation, that's going to be pretty bad for labor, and I would also add, not so good for productivity. But if you strike the right balance between automation and new tasks, it could actually turn out to be much better for labor and also much better for productivity. So then, within this framework, a natural question to ask is, A, what determines this balance between automation and new tasks? I'm not going to dwell too much on that, because I'm going to try to answer one part of that question in the context of my second topic, which is, I think, what many of you want to hear and think more about, which is what is the role of unions within this broad environment. But the only thing I want to point out in response to the first question of the balance between automation and new tasks is the following thing, which I would like you to keep at the back of your minds. It takes several to tango. If you want to create new tasks, you need the tech companies, wherever they are, and often in the United States, but some in Sweden, some in China, some in Canada, but the tech companies to create the technologies that enable new tasks. You need the producers, manufacturers, service providers, government, to want to use these technologies for new tasks. And you need broader pressures or help from other stakeholders, including the labor movement, for this to be true as well. So with that in mind, I want to come back. I want to spend a little bit more time on what does this all mean for the labor movement, and what does this all mean for the Swedish model, at least so far as I understand the Swedish model. I think pretty much everybody in this room has greater understanding, practice, and living memory of the Swedish model than I do. But I want to make a few points here, which I think are important. One is that if your view of unions is the following, and I know, and this is why the Swedish model is so important, this is not typically the view of most Swedish workers or labor representatives. But if your view of the unions is more Anglo-Saxon, meaning that they negotiate wages and then they let the company to do the management, organization, technology choices, and everything else, which is sometimes called the right to manage model. Then automation is pretty much the death knell of the labor movement. Why? Well, because we are at a point where the tech sector is creating a lot of automation opportunities. So now the labor movement is supposed to work for shared prosperity by negotiating higher wages. But that's being between a rock and a hard place. If you do ask for higher wages and get them, then that doubly increases the incentives of companies to use these automation technologies because labor has become more expensive. So using automation technologies to sideline labor and economize on labor becomes all the more attractive. Or you don't negotiate for higher wages, but then what is your membership going to think of you? What's your role and where are you? So that's a very bleak future for labor or labor organizations in general. So in some sense, the right to manage model could work if firms very strongly depend on labor. But once you introduce this menu of automation, then it doesn't work. So is it really that bleak for the labor movement? No, I don't think so. In fact, not for what at least I understand to be the Swedish model or co-determination. Because if the labor movement's role is to negotiate both on wages and working conditions, training, organizations, and technology use, then we're in a different world. We're in a different world in two senses. One is that now the labor movement has greater power because they can try to negotiate for higher wages and actually let's not automate these tasks, or if you're going to automate these tasks, let's offer additional training and introduce new tasks. And second, this can actually be very productivity enhancing if done the right way, because if it encourages firms to venture into new tasks and combine that with new training opportunities, it can actually provide a lot of new energy for finding better uses for labor and make labor capable of doing more sophisticated tasks. So here you see it is very important that the only game in town is not automation. Because again, yeah, with automation, even if the only game was in town was the automation, the kind of a co-determination model where labor is involved in every aspect of the company's organization could still empower labor more, but it's only in the presence of more pro-worker users of technology, such as new tasks, that this model becomes really empowered. But there's a small catch here, of course, if the tech sector is really completely shying away from working on these technologies that could be more pro-worker, that's going to complicate things. But I want to make two other points on the labor movement in this context. One is that this implies that labor representatives have to reach the same level of expertise, comfort, and foresightedness on AI and digital technologies as the companies themselves. Because you cannot negotiate on something you don't understand. You cannot negotiate and try to use for good something you do not, at least in some form, embrace. There are some leaders in Europe and the United States who are becoming aware of this. For example, AFL-CIO has started a new technology institute. But I think broadly, the labor movement everywhere is behind on this. I think the attitude of, for example, the Longshoremen's Union saying no to automation everywhere is just a suicide pact for labor. That is just not the way forward, because if you say that, you can delay some things by 1 year, 2 years, perhaps 3 years, but automation is going to come. I can assure you it's going to come. So the only thing is that can we make sure that while that automation is being done, we do it in a better way for labor and in the side to get the training and the new tasks and other more pro-worker things. My second point is actually possibly even more uncomfortable. But at the end, I think both of these are an advantage for the Swedish model and co-determination relative to other models. The labor movement has to be much more in the business of finding compromises and win-win situations. And again, that's because of the preponderance of automation technologies. Meaning that if at the end of the day, the menu available to union leaders ranges from, okay, you work with us and you end up with lower profits, or you work with us and you end up with much lower profits, with a great menu of automation possibilities, that again is not going to be as bad as the longshoremen's no to automation, but it's not going to be great. So the labor movement has to identify places where it can greatly benefit, meaning bring higher wages, better employment opportunities, better employment conditions for its workers, but in a way that's profitable for companies as well. Is that a pipe dream? No, I don't believe so. I don't believe so because there is one thing that labor representatives and workers themselves know and companies don't know, which is actual work. So if you're going to use AI to increase productivity, the best way to do that, again, especially if you're going to go with new tasks, new training, new capabilities for workers, is actually understand the job. And who has that tacit knowledge? Workers themselves, and to some degree their supervisors and their labor representatives. Companies don't. That's why you have these string of disastrous technologies from Microsoft and Oracle and other companies, because they're trying to top-down engineer solutions for ground things that is not going to work very well most of the time. So it is this capability that can, together with the right embrace and understanding of technology, that can create a new empowerment of the labor movement. But it has to be embedded in this co-determination model. That's going to be very difficult for US unions, for example, because A, they cannot negotiate at the industry level. B, they are further behind in terms of coming to the frontier of technological understanding. And C, there is much greater distrust and conflict. So the co-determination has also built some capital for the labor movement with companies that can be leveraged for these tasks. So I think these are, therefore, in my opinion, hard times for labor everywhere, but there is a silver lining that these possibilities for using digital technologies in a more pro-worker direction for new tasks also creates a much greater dependence of society, of productivity, and even some companies that are going to be successful ultimately on cooperation with labor and the inducement of labor representatives to do this. Now, I am therefore not an optimist about the future of labor, but I'm not hugely pessimistic either. I think there are possibilities, not easy ones, but there are possibilities. When it comes to democracy, I think I'm even more worried, because I think democracy depends on trust, democracy depends on participation, compromise, it depends on dissent, and all of these things have already been damaged by algorithms. and they're going to continue to be damaged. Again, there too, I don't think there's anything in the nature of technology that's authoritarian. Some people even claimed a decade or several years ago that AI is authoritarian. No, AI is not authoritarian. AI is a platform, is a tool. You can use it for great authoritarian reasons. And China, some US companies, even in Sweden, I understand people are doing that. But on the other hand, AI is an enormously useful tool for providing better information to people. That providing better information is the heart of these new tasks. So if you're going to achieve my dream of more pro-worker AI, that goes through providing reliable, relevant, productivity-enhancing information to workers. It can also provide reliable, useful information to people as citizens, as part of their social life, and as part of their dissent and political participation. But here, the huge concentration of AI and algorithms in the hands of a few companies is even more of a problem. And algorithmic governance, I think, has to be viewed in this way. It is both an automation technology, but it's also a technology for further centralizing decision-making. And as it centralizes decision-making in the hands of companies, it's actually also empowering the designers and the controllers, designers of the technology and the controllers of data. So it is a process of centralizing power, which can never be very good for democracy. And I think we are already seeing the price of it. I do not believe that the problems we have with democracy today, with support for democratic institutions being at an all-time low since data is being collected, is due to AI. AI is a contributing factor, but I think AI and the way that algorithms are being used are going to make things worse. They have already made it worse, and they can make it much, much worse. The final thing I will say, and then I will conclude, is that actually the issue and the stakes are even larger. Because we should also ask, not just what does algorithmic governance, what does automation mean for the labor movement, what does it mean for democracy, but we should also ask, what does it mean for humanity? So if we are, at the end, disempowered, sidelined, pacified, made into pure consumers without the capabilities to become contributors to the social good, I think humanity would be greatly diminished. And again, there is a choice. There is nothing in the nature of these technologies, I believe, that is necessarily disempowering to people. I do not think that even if the guesses or the forecasts of some technologists that we are moving towards AGI, even if this were true, this needs to be a completely disempowering technology for humans, because we can find ways of creating new tasks, new capabilities, new ways in which humans can be at the driving seat. But the way that we are currently going is that it is disempowering most people, and in fact, only in a superficial way, it is algorithms and AI being empowered. Really, it is a small, very elite group of designers, marketers, engineers, and capital entrepreneurs, capital owners that are being empowered because they control AI, because they control data, and because they control where we are going with those data and AI. And again, that brings me back to not just sidelining labor, but creating new tasks, new capabilities, new empowerments for both citizens and workers. I think that is a possibility. That is where we could go. It is not where we're heading. And if that's going to happen, you do need a shock to the system, and that shock can come only from three places. It can come from democratic participation, it can come from civil society organizations more broadly, and it can come from the labor movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you can please have a seat, sir. And I welcome Magdalena Andersson.
I go here? Okay.
Please, on stage. Leader of the Social Democratic Party and also former Prime Minister. Please have a seat in the middle. And you have the floor now for reactions, and also I think you have a question for Mr. Acemoglu. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. And the first time I listened to you was actually 30 years ago. You had a seminar for PhD students at MIT. I was listening in, and you were talking about this, by then, rather new thing, the internet. And you said it was something we should use, which was this very new thing called the World Wide Web, WWW.
It shows my age.
And mine. But it was a good tip. And it was just as interesting listening to you today as it was 30 years ago. I think in Sweden, in general, we are rather relaxed about new technology, including automatization. My predecessor as party leader, as prime minister, and a former trade union leader for the Swedish metal workers, he always said that we shouldn't be afraid of new technology. We should be afraid of old technology. This is the only way for a small country like Sweden to stay competitive in a global world. But of course, a prerequisite for having also people within the labor movement to be optimistic about automatization and new technology is that the gains from these new technologies are actually distributed in a fairly reasonable way between labor and capital. And the second thing, of course, is that there is a safety net for workers that will be laid off and opportunities to be reskilled and retrained for new jobs. And of course, if you look at how Sweden looks today, both those things are weaker than they were before. The safety net is weaker, possibilities for retraining and reskilling is worse, and also the number of members in our trade unions are lower than before, and this is a problem. Another thing that is different is right now is what you also talked about is the big tech companies. They have so much power in this, and the regulation of these companies, I think there is a lot more to do. And then, of course, also the pace and the speed of change that we're in right now. A question to you is, you talked a lot about, well, and then, of course, what you said about democracy, of course. I mean, in an AI world with all the potential for deep fake and everything, I mean, what is true and what isn't true? What is true, what is fake? What is up, what is down? What is backward, what is forward? We'll have no idea. I was listening to another Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa, and she's a Filipino journalist. And she said, where truth goes out, democracy will also go out. And this is something that we, I think, should discuss more in order to be able to regulate at least algorithms we have in a better way than today. But a question for you. You talked a lot about automatization and the labor share. And you were not all that optimistic. Is there any way, is there any way you see forward where you could actually increase the gains for the labor and the employees when there is new technology coming? And I also am thinking right now, when we're in the middle of a demographic shift with an aging population, we have labor shortage in lots of workplaces and lots of sectors. Wouldn't that be an opportunity for the labor movement to actually move forward and make sure that the gains from this technological shift could be distributed more equally?
Absolutely. I think there are many possibilities, and I think aging populations are a challenge, but they're also an opportunity for labor. But let's think about this a little more, because I think the subtleties are important. First of all, if the only thing we do with technology is automate, then indeed labor share will decline and decline. May happen slowly, may happen rapidly. In US manufacturing, it happened very rapidly. In Danish manufacturing, it happened quite rapidly. New tasks are critical. If the pro-worker thing here is, again, creating new tasks. So if you can use technology both for automation and creating new tasks, then labor share need not decline. And then that's a much better basis for shared prosperity. But that requires a real concerted effort, both on the development of technology and in this use of technology which involves labor unions and other government involvement. And another part of the Swedish model, of course, is the corporatist thing, which makes the government more embedded in some of these issues. And I think that's important because, you know, regulation of AI is a very big challenge, and it's somehow in the wild right now in the US. In Sweden, it has there is a possibility that the corporatist model could be useful for that as well. Now, aging populations could be a very different context. Labor becomes scarce, especially middle-aged labor. That's so important for manufacturing and other things. Yeah. But again, there is no definitive, determinate impact of aging populations. In some places, labor scarcity may empower labor and labor movement. In some other places, it can just lead to more and more automation, because after all, if labor is scarce, that is all the more reason to use robots, controlled automated machinery, or other office technologies to do what labor could do. So the Swedish example, the German example, I think shows, at least in a few places, that something better can happen, which is that because workers are more scarce, while you're automating some tasks, you also want to use that scarce and valuable resource in a better way, and that you train it and you allocate it to other tasks. Now, US hasn't aged anywhere as rapidly as Germany, South Korea, Japan, or Sweden is not one of the most rapidly aging places as well, but US is even less rapidly aging. But when similar pressures happen in the US, they don't do the retraining. They just go straight to automation. And that really shows the context really matters. The fact that many managers in the US really are very keen on reducing dependence on labor. The labor organizations are either absent or they're not really negotiating on the right things. I think that makes it much harder. So I think aging populations is going to create a new environment, but that new environment has to be used the right way.
As an economist, could I ask you a question? And maybe as a Swedish economist, because you talk about automatization as we should restrict automatization. But as an economist, shouldn't you do all the automatization you can? And then we could take the gains from that in order we can distribute the gains from automatization in a reasonable way. We could work less, or we could invent new exciting things for humanity to consume.
Actually, I do not advocate restricting automation. My recommendation is do automation. It's inevitable. If it's done right, it can increase productivity, but couple it with lots of new tasks and other pro-worker activities. If somehow you tie your hands and you cannot do those things, then we may need to think about restricting automation. But the ideal thing would be, no, let automation go ahead, so long as we don't excessively automate and we use our energy, our creative energy, our organizational resources in order to find more productive, better, safer, more interesting, more dignifying things for labor as well. And we have been able to do that in many periods of history. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think in many countries, especially in the United States, there are reasons for excessively automating. So in the United States, for example, I don't know the numbers for Sweden. In the United States, I worked hard in order to calculate these numbers. But if you look at the US tax code, companies receive a subsidy when they automate because capital is not taxed. And in fact, you get a lot of subsidies in the form of interest deductions and other sort of amortization expenses. Whereas if you were to invest in your workers and training, you would pay employee taxes, payroll taxes, and workers would pay income taxes and a variety of other expenses, including healthcare. Now, healthcare is not an issue in Sweden, but the whole thing is biased in favor of capital and against labor. Another thing is that when management union relations become conflictual, managers love automation because it empowers them, it enables them to get rid of unions and to get rid of the troublesome workers. So there's an additional context-dependent reason for excessive automation, which is this conflict. So the better that conflict is managed, and again, the sort of the co-determination model here could be very useful, you may weaken or get rid of that additional incentive for automation. So once you do these artificial bad reasons for automation, you know, I welcome additional automation that increases productivity as long as we also put the right effort in new tasks. But let me actually say that I am, on the other hand, not optimistic at all. In fact, I'm very pessimistic that you can have a lot of automation without anything else, increase productivity and redistribute those gains. I do not think that's feasible. I do not think that's a good way of achieving shared prosperity. First of all, I do not think it's feasible because when you do the automation, you're actually changing the political economy. You're weakening labor. So you're empowering the people who are the technologists and the companies. What do you think? Why do you think then we would have the political support for extensive redistribution? But secondly, I think history shows that much better way of achieving shared prosperity is via wage growth and employment growth, not via just the safety net. The safety net is super important. We need the safety net, and we need it more in the age of AI, but not as the chief message, the chief mechanism for achieving shared prosperity. And it has the additional problem that I think people are happier, they're better citizens, better democratic citizens, when they feel that they are contributing themselves, not just sitting on the side and getting government checks.
No, I perfectly agree with. Therefore, reskilling and retraining, and
Absolutely.
also having also from a democratic perspective, that the knowledge about AI and new technology is spread among the population.
So let's put in there new tasks.
Yes.
Reskilling, retraining, and new tasks.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think we were having this discussion in the late 90s when the new, information technology came, and we were talking like this at the time. And then we spread the knowledge across the population, and then we have all this gaming industry in Sweden, and we invented Spotify and Skype and other things. But it didn't just come. It was actually thanks to very decisive politicians who made sure that we could spread the knowledge them all around the population.
So looking forward, Magdalena, you led the group drafting a new manifesto for the Social Democratic Party next year. And there you mentioned artificial intelligence several times. And it's the only party program I found who does it. And it's also the first time for the party. Can you tell us a bit more about this work as well?
And it's also the latest party program.
Yeah, it's arriving next year.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a draft. Sorry.
To be honest, yes.
Yeah.
No, of course, and of course, I mean, this is a big thing happening right now. So part of the party program, we're describing the development we see in the world and in Sweden right now. And of course, AI is part of it. We write a lot about, of course, the importance of distributing the gains from the new technology in a fair and equal way. But also what I talked about, the importance to that all citizens in Sweden have the possibility to learn enough and retrain in order to be attractive on the new labor market will be very important. But also that the ethical aspects of AI has to be handled in a good way. And the only way to do that is to have a regulation of AI. We need to regulate it. I think I'm not so optimistic about the US as a good regulator of AI, but maybe the European Union can do a job there. I think the Digital Service Act that was decided was a good thing, but I think it was really only a first step, and we need to do a lot more. And not those words in the party and the proposal to the party program, but in that direction.
Thank you. And Mr. Acemoglu, if you give one policy advice to the Social Democratic Party, like here we have a manifesto, what would you do what would you recommend?
I mean, I think all of the things that we're talking about here are part of that. But, I think, just like Magdalena said, I think the European context is very important. And I believe that the biggest social good that the Social Democratic Party can do is to play a leadership role in Europe. Because Sweden is an important country, Swedish regulations will be important, but nowhere as important as Europe. And there are two things here that Sweden can play a leadership role. One is better regulation. It's very hard. You know, some regulations that were good in spirit, with the right philosophy, such as the European data GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, amazingly at the right time, at the right place, with the right values, completely backfired, completely useless, in fact, probably counterproductive. You need much more flexible and much more forward-looking regulation that doesn't, at the end, empower large companies to sort of go around it and actually gain an advantage relative to small companies. But then there's another issue. I don't think it is sustainable for Europe to be the regulator while US is the innovator. So US is not going to be the leader in regulator. They may or may not follow. Under Trump, they will not follow, but they may follow under another administration. But Europe is going to be the regulatory leader, at least in terms of setting the aspirations and developing some models and frameworks. But you cannot do that unless you are the innovator. First, you won't have the credibility. Second, you will send all of your best talent away, which is what's happening right now. And third, I think to be the right regulator, you also need to understand the technology deeply, which involves being the innovator. But again, Sweden has, for the very, very, very large fraction of the time since 1932, has managed that, to be at the technology frontier while setting up a very strong social safety net, setting up strong unions, and strong regulations. So there are lessons from that. But also, Mario Draghi is right. I think Mario Draghi's emphasis that Europe needs to invest additional resources and prioritize digital innovation is right. But there's a big danger. I think the path of least resistance is to try to create national champions without putting enough attention to frontier technology and efficiency, and that would be disastrous for Europe. And again, I think Sweden has a better track record of doing those sorts of things. Subsidies are common to various technology imports and things, and they're quite well managed. So I think there is a very important leadership role. So in some sense, Swedish parties, whoever is in power, should aim for European regulation. That's the objective, in my opinion.
Right.
Thank you. Do you have a reaction on this?
Yes. No. Yeah. I think it's a very good point. We can't have U.S. and China as innovators and then EU as regulators, and that the fact that what Draghi is saying, that Europe is behind in many of the new technologies that we know will be the future, and we have to do much better work than we're doing. Then, of course, some of the solutions that Draghi is proposing is, from a Swedish perspective,
You don't have to be
they want
completely
us
polite.
to pay for it, which we and the Germans are sometimes a bit skeptical towards. A disproportionate part of it they want us to pay. But in general, yes, Europe has to do much better work when it comes to innovation in these areas, and I think Sweden has definitely a potential to be an important part of it. We are ahead in the technology. We do have lots of skills. We do have a history of having very innovative entrepreneurs. We do have a history of actually spreading knowledge to many people, a large part of the population, which is a very good base for an innovative economy.
And I think that might be the last words for this panel. And thank you so much for coming, both of you. And a warm applause. Also, we're not giving flowers, they're hard to take on the flight home, but we have a big donation to the Solidarity Fund, which is a trade union fund for projects in the parts of the world. So that's from both of you. Thank you so much.
More meaningful.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so we are going to continue straight with the next step in this afternoon. As we said at the beginning, this conference is kind of at the end of a lot of research that has been done. It was mentioned as well that this knowledge on what does algorithmic management do, what's the effect on workers, is essential for trade union movements. So we have today 2 sets of research, specific Swedish research, to be presented today. So please stick around because we have the research team here to give a presentation on the effects on the Swedish shop floor. And I'm talking in between the stage being changed because it's better to work with these 2 tables. I also forgot to say something at the beginning. We are taking some photos, mostly of the speakers. But if you don't want to be in the photos, please tell us, because then we make sure that you are not in the photos that we share. I think we can start, yes. So I would like to introduce our team of researchers. I don't know if they are in the light. Yeah, you can see them. So we start with the first report, and it's a report that actually is published today. It's about algorithmic management, experience and responses in trade unions, in Swedish warehousing, retail and transport industries. We have Karen Hakansta from the Karolinska Institute, Pille Strauss-Raats also from Karolinska Institute, and Ruben Lind from Karolinska Institute. Unfortunately, Pontus Bloemen was sick today, otherwise he would be there as well, like from the Stockholm University. And I'm not going to take too much time. I'm going to give you the clicker and then you can present your work.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely happy to be here today to talk a bit about our report. It looks like this. I think there were...
There's many copies.
Yeah, so. Good. We did this earlier this year. It's an interview study, and Pontus couldn't be here, unfortunately. And the scope is a little bit narrower now. We go from automation and AI to specifically algorithmic management. And if there's one or two who doesn't really know what algorithmic management is, we have a slide here for you. There is no official definition of algorithmic management, but basically it's the use of digital technologies to augment, improve, or automate managerial decision-making at work. And what does it do? It plans, depending on what kind of technology you have and how you use it. It plans, it monitors, it evaluates, it instructs, disciplines, hires, and fires. It has the potential to enable workers. We have already listened to a few examples, how it can actually be good in workplaces, but it can also be the controlling and detrimental. This is what we're going to talk about today. And it all depends on how the technology is used and designed, and also on the wider economic, political, social, cultural, and organizational context. So the same kind of technology use can actually have different outcomes in 2 similar companies in the same country, and definitely between companies in different countries because of the legislation and background, etc. So what we did, we interviewed 21 persons. A few of them were high-level trade union employees at the central level. Some of them are here today. But most of the people we talked to were trade union representatives at company level and also workers. And the aim of our study was to explore the use of algorithmic management in 3 sectors. It was retail, warehousing, and transport companies. And we had a specific focus on the effects of algorithmic management on work and workers' rights, the response of workers to issues linked to AM, and also a discussion around the implications of these findings for trade unions, solidarity, and policy. So, we have been talking about unions now before our presentation, and just briefly then to compare these 3 sectors, we discuss a bit about the level of union power resources. So in the warehouses, the people we met there, they witnessed of low union density, low level of affiliation, and fairly low presence of trade unions and safety and health representatives. The retail sector, those we spoke to, also witnessed a low level of power resources. There it was more the fact that in retail, a very large share of the employees have precarious working conditions. And in the transport sector, in comparison, has high levels of union power resources. There are high affiliation rates, strong trade unions, but it differs a lot because you have different areas of transport where conditions are different. And then to start off then, about the reactions or the response of workers on AM, most of them, the people we talked to were actually positive. They said, this technology, it helps me. It makes my job easier. Or they said, the technology we had before, it was really bad. And now we have this new technology and it's much better. So most of them were positive. But there were also issues raised. In the warehouse sector, there were many that complained about very heavy workload, both psychological and physical. There was experiences of unfair discipline routines due to the algorithms, and there were even conflicts between the workers and management. In the retail sector, there was frustration when technology didn't work, and there were also a notable fear of action among the workers with insecure employment contracts, which was a majority in many workplaces. In transport, there was also frustration with malfunctioning technology, mainly with a focus on integrity violations due to the GPS and cameras and sensors and so forth. And also that it intensified the work, so it took away breaks and pauses, etc. So that was an overall intro. Now we're going to give some examples from these three sectors about the interaction between algorithmic management and the organizational context. And I'm leaving the word to Pille.
So I will introduce the transport sector, and it's important to start with saying that this is not, of course, the general transport sector in Sweden. This is a case study, and we looked into mainly passenger transport, so pre-ordered passenger transport where customer is a local municipality. And then additionally we looked also into freight transport, so transport of goods. And the main AM systems that were used in these two cases were driver monitoring systems. So basically, a driver is being monitored by a camera and sensors. And the goal is safety, to capture the signs of tiredness and alert the driver then if this should happen. And also...
Yeah, can you... Yeah.
Okay. Aha, okay. Oh, now it's a very different story. Okay, and the other system that was used was route planning systems that had most impact on job quality and working conditions for these workers who we looked into. I hope that you did get main points of what I said before. So, yeah, okay, great. And it's also important to note that these systems, like we talked about AI before, but it's not only super advanced technologies and AI that we speak about here. It's also systems that are quite old, and that also caused frustration for the workers, because expectation is that the technologies these days should be enabling and enhancing the work progress. But in our transport cases, we saw how system was not able to differentiate between water and land, and thus planned a route not considering the actual distance or time it took to get from point A to point B. And that, of course, had consequences for work intensity and job quality. And also, these systems relied largely on monitoring data collection, so that employees got either electronic alerts when they were like sun was shining to their eye and they were squinting. It might be a safety issue, but also notes from managers while they were stopping for too long, for example, taking an unauthorized break because they were monitored by GPS. And what was interesting, or most interesting aspect about this transport cases perhaps, was that this control kind of through algorithmic systems was often not on the direct managers, supervisors of these workers, but it was the customer, municipality, who was actually controlling, planning, managing these workers. And customer clearly does not have employer responsibility, so they do not have duty of care for the work environment, health and safety of these workers. So that's also what we mean by blurred managerial boundaries and subcontracting algorithmic management. So augmentation, now I lost myself.
No, that's good.
It's good, okay. Augmentation of managerial control means that algorithmic systems allow managers to have more oversight, more control, have more guidance and monitoring. And so we saw that this monitoring was done by the customer. And also that means fragmentation, of course. And the actual managers of these workers had quite a little power over improving the working conditions or taking up these issues that were seen as problematic by the workers. So we saw how workers tried to raise work environment issues, but they were unmet at any level because employer was economically dependent on their customer clearly, and thus had quite few incentives or few opportunities to raise problems. And another issue that was associated with the same subcontracting of algorithmic management was dehumanizing work. So the transport service was brought in as machine hours, as vehicle hours, and not as human work. So it did not consider the issues like you might have a client who has special needs, a school child who has autism and needs special consideration, or even issues like I as a driver might need a toilet break. So in order to take a break, these drivers sometimes needed to call to the customer to ask for permission to do that. And the response could be, no, you have to wait until the next ride. So this is what we mean by worker as an extension to the machine. Worker had to adapt to fit to the machine hours. And so it wasn't also not only the managers who had level of power, but also workers themselves and unions. So from many of the case studies, we saw that algorithmic management of technical systems were not seen as a work environment issue, even though clearly they do have impact on work environment. So co-determination law, health and safety law, risk assessments, these were not carried out often in line with what the legislation prescribes. And that kind of refers to the regulatory challenges, that there is a gap when digital systems allow this kind of distributed control over working conditions, then existing systems are not really equipped to deal with that. So that's the main issue with the transport, the main case from the transport sector that might have like a wider relevance for the Swedish model as well. That's it from me. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to the retail sector, here we again found interesting interaction effects between algorithmic management on the one hand and employment conditions on the other. So much like in transportation and warehousing that we also looked into, the algorithmic management systems in retail were used to monitor worker location and performance, evaluate their productivity, as well as allocating tasks and instructing workers on how to perform their work, within what time frame, and so on. But there were also another strand of technologies which had a significant impact on working conditions in retail specifically, namely predictive analytics systems and systems that were used to plan and schedule workers. So the staffing needs in retail, as you can imagine, varies a lot depending on consumer trends or seasonal variations or even the time of the day when customers come in and out. So these new systems enabled employers to collect data on all these parameters, and then they could use AI systems to create a tailored schedule. So in a way that they could create a most cost-efficient schedule, basically. So something that is also important to bear in mind when talking about retail is, as Karin mentioned before, a majority of workers have non-standard employment contracts, meaning they work either part-time or on an hourly basis. So this means that when these scheduling and planning system gets introduced, it risks streamlining and making more flexible their schedules even more. So this can create more insecure jobs, irregular schedules and working hours, or fewer hours. So if you have a part-time contract already, you risk getting even fewer hours in the long term. And if you're lucky enough to have a full-time contract, then you might be degraded to working part-time because of this optimal use of the workforce. But we saw that not only did these planning and scheduling systems affect working conditions in negative ways, but also the possibility of workers to resist and counter these adverse changes to their jobs. So we can illustrate this with this vicious circle where algorithmic management gets introduced in a context that is already characterized with quite precarious and insecure working conditions. And when schedules get more streamlined, flexible, and fragmented, this makes the jobs even more insecure, which in turn then can lead to less resistance from workers against these changes. We talked to one union representative who said that sometimes when she offered union members with a part-time contract to negotiate on their behalf so that they would get more hours, they would turn that offer down because they didn't want to be a burden for their employer. They wanted to be on good terms with them, not to be a pain in the ass. So when jobs get even more precarious, this can be like exacerbated even further. And we think that this in turn might lead to the possibility for employers to introduce even more far-reaching and adverse use cases of algorithmic management. In the warehouse sector, we found the most widespread or most extreme use of algorithmic management out of the three sectors that we studied. And here we found that the workers felt that their autonomy was quite reduced as a result of these technologies. They felt surveilled and that their discretion on how to do their job was quite limited. And this also had to do with the fact that human managers also supervised them. And algorithmic management in this sector can lead to a lot of stress. And the highest levels we found among those who worked with pick-by-voice systems. So this is basically a headset, a software-connected headset where you get instructed in real time on which item to pick, within what time frame, and which constantly measures your performance and productivity. And you can imagine that you get quite a lot of stress from having this AI voice in your head telling you what to do constantly. And those working with pick-by-light systems, they experience more physical strain and injuries as a result of these technologies, because they stand in a fixed position and they pick items based on if a if the AI turns a light red or green. And it's a quite monotonous and repetitive job. So they experience a lot of pain and strain as a result. But again, we found that the context mattered here as well. In the workplaces where there was a strong union presence and influence, the effects were less severe compared to the cases where this didn't exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So now we have one slide, one more slide. If you want more, you can read the report. This is just very briefly what we wrote, in our discussion about the response of Swedish trade unions. Magdalena just told everyone about this, that the trade union movement is by tradition positive to new technology because they see the future is in introducing new technology, in creating new jobs and for the economy. But we also we were also told about the stories. These past years, there's been long negotiations at EU level, the AI Act and the platform directive, primarily linked to algorithmic management. And that has occupied Swedish trade unions at the top level a lot. And because of this tradition, the Swedish model, where the social partners actually and the government prefer negotiations and collective bargaining rather than legislation, the initial reaction to more legislation was no and resistance. But then gradually, when it was clear that there was going to be new EU legislation, the unions turned around and they started to collaborate instead to enable to make sure that the legislation became as favorable as possible for the Swedish model and for the Swedish situation. We also heard that at central level, there's been for several years now quite a lot of fact-finding exercises, not least by Jenny and others, surveys, interview studies, about algorithmic management and how it's used and the effects on members and how they experience this. And there's also some development of guidelines that is supposed to support unions at local level and also the members. So this has been ongoing for several years. However, at local level, when we spoke to the persons there, we saw that it hasn't really reached them yet. So we experience great ignorance, they need or they want more knowledge, they want tools, and they struggle to respond to these new technologies, and they were also I'm not sure about bypassed by management, but we saw that the dialogue that is supposed to be there, according to the Co-Determination Act and the Occupational Health Act, between union and the management, simply wasn't there, and it was mainly, as we saw it, due to lack of knowledge on both sides. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Pile. Thank you, Ruben. It's great. And like Karen said, we have the copies in the back. There is it has this interesting cover as well. So if you want to read up on it, please take a copy. You can stay. You can stay here as well. We have another report being presented from Jenny Rangberg. It's a report that came out earlier this year, but it's connected. And like Karen also mentioned, there's also a lot going on, a lot of research being done. One of them is the worker survey that you will present now. In total, was 6,000 workers in the whole Nordics, so in different Nordic countries. In Sweden, you know the exact numbers better than me for Sweden, but it was the first of its kind into algorithmic management. So please take the floor.
Yeah, so the report I'm going to present is a sub-publication of this larger international study. And this part of the project that I'm going to present is written by myself and Magnus Thorn Jensen from Denmark, and it outlines the key results of the study focusing on Swedish warehouse workers. And we heard Ruben talk about pick by voice, and this is a picking solution used by 40% of the Swedish warehouse workers who responded to this survey. And as you heard, as he was telling us, it's a system that is very controlling. You have the computer voice in your head the whole day, telling you how to do your work, minute by minute, goods by like item by item. And these systems are often also programmed to automatically warn managers if you're not keeping the expected work pace. So we're talking about highly controlled work. And this is one example of how algorithms are used in warehouses in Sweden and in other countries. And this study, it aims to highlight the negative effects. There are positive effects as well, but we wanted to see what the effects can be and ways to mitigate them. And it's conducted together with these trade unions in the Nordic countries, in Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. And this country case study, as I mentioned, it focused on Swedish warehouse workers, but warehouse workers were also participants in these other countries, so we also compare to within the Nordic countries. But some of the analysis is done for and also valid for the other big sectors that were included in the survey. And the other big sector is customer service and telemarketing. And over 6,000 people, and of this, these 820 are Swedish warehouse workers. And we also already got a definition of algorithmic management. So I'll be very, very brief here. We apply a broad definition where algorithmic management, AM, is when computers or algorithms are used to perform tasks or functions that traditionally are carried out by human managers. So, and this is possible through all this data collection that software can process very quickly. And this is not just the picking process, but the big part of the manual labor in a warehouse is the picking of the goods. But it's also used for, as we heard her just before, it's used for scheduling, location tracking, task allocation, work speed, and performance monitoring, and so on. And traditionally, warehouse work has been relatively free. The picker got a printed order and could plan the route, the picking route themselves, based on their knowledge about the warehouse, about the goods, about where other people in the warehouse, their co-workers, are. Now this knowledge about the picking process have moved into the computer systems, which the employers control and can reprogram from one day to another. And this data collection also makes it possible to evaluate on an individual level and on an hourly level, on an item by item level. So we're going from a situation where you're evaluated as a work group as a whole to a situation where you as an individual are being judged on very fine data sets. And we already heard this point here. The case studies have previously shown that this risk leading to some adverse consequences, but we wanted to study this on a more systematical level. So how widespread is algorithmic management within warehousing? We have a lot of numbers here, but we can first see that 90% of Swedish warehouse workers are confronted with at least one of these forms of algorithmic management. And if we look at the big international study with the other sectors included, the same number is 75%, also very high. So this is not just something that's coming. We already heard this here today. This is here now. And it's affecting more and more sectors of the economy. We see 69% say that a digital system monitor how fast they work. More than half say that it's used to evaluate the quality of their performance. About half say that a computer program is tracking their breaks or work time, and it's also used to determine the distribution of tasks in their workplace. It's used for location tracking, shift scheduling, and 17% also say it's used for leaderboarding, where you can compare your results with your coworkers, often also in real time. And of those who responded that a computer is used to monitor their work pace or evaluate the quality of their work, the most common ones here, 50% of them say that this is also used to make decisions that have negative impact on them. For example, it's used to determine who gets worse or less work hours. It's used to distribute warnings, and 17% also say that it's used to determine layoffs. So the use of AM is very widespread within the warehouse sector, and the studies shows that on average this have several adverse consequences for employees. We constructed an AM index based on how many of these forms of AM the employees experienced and controlled for a wide range of background variables. So we were able to estimate the effects of AM on different outcomes. And these outcomes are calculated on the sample as a whole in the whole international study. And the use of AM is strongly associated with a series of negative consequences. We see a decreased job autonomy. We see lower levels of trust. So the more employees are exposed to AM, the less they feel that their managers trust them and the less they trust their managers. We see a decreased job satisfaction and motivation, higher workload, higher levels of stress, and an increased job insecurity. So employees exposed to AM feel a higher degree about whether they're going to keep their job or not. So, as you can see, the study clearly indicates that the way AM is used in warehousing in Sweden today, it has a range of adverse consequences for the employees. But fortunately, the study also shows that these negative effects are not inevitable. In workplaces where workers have a significant influence on company decisions and are involved and consulted when new technology is being implemented, AM does not have any negative effects on the degree of autonomy, trust, and job satisfaction and motivation. And it's pretty much the same thing with transparency, but we see it to a lesser extent. Transparency in company decisions also can mitigate some of these effects. But as you can see, my ugly red thing here does not cover all the negative effects. We still see increased workload, increased stress, and increased job insecurity, regardless the level of employer influence and transparency. So, to sum things up, this is already widespread. This is not in the future, it's here. It has several negative consequences on an average. And high employee involvement can mitigate some of these effects, and to some extent also transparency. So, to sum this up, these systems are not just neutral tools in the hands of the employers, but instead something that it is crucial that trade union demand to have a say over and to be at the table when these systems are implemented and used and changed in the workplaces. I think we need this just to both to protect employees from a dystopian work life where everything can be measured and controlled, but also, as we saw here, this risk leading to a decreased trust between workers and their employees. And this is the trust that the Swedish model built on. So we need to have a say on this also, so that the Swedish model stands strong also in tomorrow's digital labor market. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny.
Tack.
Thank you. So, it's a lot of interesting data, but to discuss this, we have a panel of different trade union experts to join me on the stage. We have Linda Larsson from LO Sweden, German Wender from Arena ID, and Thea Holmlund from Handels Trade Union. Please join me. Is it possible? Yes. This is my glasses. Thanks. Welcome. So I think we had a lot of information, a lot of input, and I think both Daron Acemoglu, Magdalena Andersson, but also the presenters of the research, all of it points at that if it goes the way it's going, we will face some negative consequences for workers' conditions, also organized labor. There's a lot of negativity, you could say, but also the positive angle, the silver lining is that the trade union movement, and I think also that's why we also ended with Jenny's last part. There is also in our data, the data that she found, the worker survey, if you involve workers, there's a lot of possibility to mitigate some tasks and some effects. And I would like to ask maybe all of you to come in, like you heard all of this, you've read maybe also the studies. What from your side is the idea of like what should be the trade union strategy? Are you already working on it? Because we heard as well, like there's the national level, there's some work, but how are you working on these topics and what is your strategy at this moment, seeing this background? Maybe we start with you, Thea.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this important topic, and thank you for very interesting presentations. I think both studies highlight how algorithmic management is a very two-sided nature, and how it can mean both improvements and degradations of jobs and working conditions. And today we've been focusing mainly on the negative sides, and as factors such as reduced autonomy, trust and well-being among workers, and increased workloads, and experiences of control and surveillance. And at our union, we've mainly been studying the warehousing sector previously, and our results has been very similar to what you've seen in your studies. And thus, I think, or we think that like algorithm management and AI systems are high-risk systems and should be treated as that. And employers also need to take precautions. However, these systems also can mean benefits. They may reduce mental strain, decrease picking errors, and create opportunities for skills development, as tasks associated with new digital systems may lead to more rewarding and meaningful tasks. And as these automated systems often need specialized knowledge, this can mean skills development. However, employers often fail to invest in upskilling of current workers and often opt out to outsource these tasks to system providers. And that's problematic in a union perspective. And both studies, as you said, they also point to the role of union influence, and that unions must get to play a bigger role in the implementation and management of these systems. And we have many examples that where unions have been involved, we've also been able to decrease the bad impacts and to make it benefit the workers. And similar to the case studies, also our studies have shown that a problem is that the union branch is often involved at a very late stage, and then it's difficult to address occupational health and safety concerns effectively.
So too little, too late.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the results from the retail case study is especially interesting, as we haven't studied it, and like the part of algorithmic scheduling and planning, how this is something that makes work more precarious in terms of flexible staffing and understaffing. And I think that's an important knowledge for us as well, because this is a very prioritized issue at our union, to work with involuntary part-time and to have secure employment and to know what hours to work. So I think that these are important insights. And in general, implementation of these systems may, if it leads to simplified jobs, then it could also make workers more replaceable, and that could also lead to more precarious work, more insecure employment. So this is also something we need to address in negotiations. Something else that we're concerned about is also like when warehouses introduce these systems or automate, they sometimes relocate, and that may mean that the current workers, that it becomes too far to travel for them, and they have to leave their jobs, and you have to rebuild union organization from scratch, and maybe you lose old agreements that you've been negotiated concerning salary systems.
So it could be a strategy to relocate, perhaps, or it's a part of the results.
Yeah.
You need a new plant, a modern plant, and they relocate, and it has other effects as well.
Exactly.
And could I go maybe to you, Linda, because you are at LO, you're looking at digitalization more on a central level, I think. So it's interesting also the take of LO. How do you look at this this dynamic as well that's there? We've seen that this is happening. It's been coming, but it's happening now. 75% we found. There's other numbers out there, and in warehousing even more. So a majority of the workers are confronted. How do you deal with that at LO?
Yeah, so obviously I think, as Karen mentioned before, we have been on a fact-finding mission for the past years. Because obviously it's about the tools and how they are being used. And also how it affects the workers when they are being used. And obviously we have, I would say, we get our intel obviously from our unions, our member unions, but we also wanted to have some research, to have a look into it in a more systematic way. So that's why we've been very, very happy that we have had some Swedish research as well now over the past few years to get a better grip of the Swedish situation, because as we've been talking about here today, in Sweden we do have a model, as everyone always states, but it's actually a fact, and we've been taking care of digital transformation in the workplace for decades and decades now. And it was also made possible with the idea of the workers and the union's representatives being deeply involved in that and being able to shape the good work. That was the idea. So we have systematic OSH, we have co-determination, as we know, we have the collective agreements, and obviously we have GDPR. But how do they actually work in reality? And so that's why we're happy at this stage now to be able to talk about the results, and also from our unions who also have digged a bit deeper into this. And what we see from our perspective is that, and I think the research, some of it highlights some of the deficits that we see ourselves when we have made our inquiries. And it's we're supposed to, in theory, be active as trade unions before, during, and after the implementation of new tech, actually also following up. in the workplace, but we saw in our own inquiries that it's a small fraction of the workforce. We directed our inquiry directly to blue-collar workers, and it's a small fraction who says that they have been involved when new technology has been implemented in the workplace. And so here is a lot of work to do on the employers, but also on the employee side, obviously. And I think the research also shows that. There is also a problem. We have a problem in general in the workplace with the pace, the amount that is going to be produced in a little time, obviously. So there we already know that the workforce is a lot under pressure, and there is a lot of stress already. And when you implement digital technologies that enhances this, then the question becomes, how much stress can a worker tolerate? When is there a limit for how much stress and pressure that we could take in the workplace? So I think we need to have a bigger discussion about this. One thing that we saw in our research as well that also mirrors the research that we just heard about is that some effects can be mitigated. We know through co-determination and also being involved, but also through the systematic OSH, where we saw in our inquiry that even if people felt stressed due to the technology, this stress was somehow mitigated through a systematic OSH work in the workplace.
Occupational health and safety, I guess,
exactly.
right?
Thank you so much. So it's good to be reminded that there is challenges, but we also have good tools in place. So maybe it's more also of enforcement of the tools that we already have in place. Yes.
Yeah, and maybe that's also because Linda, you also said like, okay, we've been dealing with this technological change for decades. I take it to you, Herman. You've also done a lot of research on this topic, also some positive cases. But how do you see? How do we get this right? Like we've got it right here in Sweden, at least in the past. We can get it right again. I think that's also the hopeful message of the keynote. But how do we get there? And what are the lessons that you found maybe in some of the cases you've researched?
Yeah, I'll tell you, and then you can all go home. No, but I mean, if we knew that, we'd be doing it maybe. I think a key thing here is to learn more about it and understand more about it. And so I'd like to sort of do my sad and inescapable duty as an academic, which is to bring in theoretical concepts and call for more research, which is what I'll do. So essentially, as I see it, these systems are what's in research usually called socio-technical systems, which means that they are deeply intertwined with social, institutional, economic factors, which many of the people that have spoken so far have mentioned. And I think this is really key. And when I read the two studies that were presented here today, I constantly was thinking of a classic paper from 1983 by Lisanne Bainbridge, which is called Ironies of Automation. You should all Google it. It's a wonderful, just 4-page paper, which everyone who is interested in AI or thinking about these things should read. Ironies of Automation, if you want to Google it. And in the paper, she quotes an even older paper from 1975, which at that time wasn't that old, but yeah. And the quote says, "Even highly automated systems need human beings for supervision, adjustment, maintenance, expansion, and improvement. Therefore, one can draw the paradoxical conclusion that automated systems still are man-machine systems for which both technical and human factors are important." So essentially what they're saying is that automation creates new tasks for people, which is exactly what Daron Acemoglu was saying that we should try to promote, right? So the key thing for me is how do we ensure that these new tasks, which are, at least so far from everything, all evidence we know from history, are unavoidable. How do we make sure that these new tasks are better, right? Safer, require more skills, are better paid, are more, less monotonous, and so forth. There's another theoretical concept called heteromation that maybe some of you have heard. It was coined in a book in 2017. It's a similar idea, but there the scholars argue that digital technologies increasingly push workloads to end users. So to all of us who use these systems. We've all experienced, in checkout machines in supermarkets or in banks, we're doing the job for the systems or for the company, right? So this is also creating new tasks. And all these things, in my view, aren't necessarily bad because we're constantly having to do new things. The key is, what are those things and how can they benefit workers? And I think, of course, as everyone has said here today, unions are crucial for this process to be shaped in what Daron Acemoglu calls a pro-worker AI, right? And I think another thing that both studies show is that we need more research. We need to know more. So there has been so far it's a growing field, how automation and digital automation specifically and AI is affecting workers. But it's an even newer research field, how unions come into this, because it's an even more novel phenomenon, right? And most studies so far, not all of them, but I'd say a large portion, are on blue-collar jobs. We need to know more about white-collar jobs. We need to know more about how similar technologies play out in different sectors or in different companies in the same sector. So we need more comparative studies. And I think we should also explore what Linda was mentioning and what's highlighted in Jenny's and Magnus' paper, which is that there is some evidence, at least, that some outcomes are less amenable to union influence. In other words, it seems easier or more, achievable to shape some outcomes positively than others. And we need to know more about that in order to tailor, the measures that we want to take going forward.
Because this is also, Linda mentioned, and I bring this to you, Thea, because she mentioned like how much stress can we take, and we know as well that there's like burnouts and things. So there's there's a lot of strain on workers. I don't know if it's more than the past. I wouldn't know like if this is the case, but there is a lot of strain. There is some occupational health and safety risk, and it's no longer only physical but also mentally. I think it also was shown also in Jenny's example with the pick by voice very much, and it was also in the case study. It came back like people are really drained after a day. They really literal quotes that they need to really take time to relax, and that they're they come home broken after a day of work. So there's a real risk. How do you see that on the shop floor? How do we deal with that? Because Gemran also said it's not only that we negotiated, but there need to be hard limits perhaps, or that's at least what Jenny's report also shows, that there's some factors that are negatively impacted, but just by like a good relationship and good co-determination, if you are gonna put more and more workload on the workers, of course this gonna come to a limit. Is there are you already thinking about or maybe you have already examples that you negotiate these kind of limits, okay, we could push the system to the maximum of the workers, but that's not sustainable, but we would rather do a bit reasonable targets, for example?
Yeah, and I think that is something you can address in with help of co-determination and also the Work Environment Act. And we have a few examples where, for example, we have one union branch at the warehouse who got access to the data that the pick by voice is collecting, and through that data, they were able to argue for more permanent employment and to decrease agency work. And
reduce the insecurity, kind of. So there's workload, but then less insecurity, so there's a better...
Yeah. And I guess also you can, to access that data is also, you could also use it for arguing that you need more staff, or that the systems should be designed in a way that is taking the working environment and the workload in consideration. And the development agreement that is between, it's an old agreement, what year is it from?
1982, I think.
82, yeah.
1982, right? Okay.
Yeah, so it's an old agreement, but it provides some tools for the current technological developments. And we also have one example of one union branch at a warehouse where they, through this development agreement, which is an agreement between the employer organizations and the unions, they can use a consultant when an employer is implementing a new system or making a new change. They can consult a consultant that can help the union to analyze and evaluate these systems.
And that's a link as well. It's now in the Platform Work Directive for platform workers. They can get an expert to help them understand. I think it was also mentioned in the first block, the knowledge, the understanding, the level of knowledge that's needed to really negotiate these kind of things. It needs to go up. Linda, because I hear as well, like, we got the data and we could negotiate better, but there is some limits on how much data you can collect on workers. But we're kind of, are we past this question? Like, are we just collecting all the data of all the workers? No, I'm honestly asking this, and maybe also with my head coming from Brussels. You know, you have a lot of the GDPR was mentioned before already. There is some limits on what you can do with, you know, the permanent surveillance of workers is not allowed, and it's happening through these systems. Yeah. So we're just skipping, like, there's rules and they're not being enforced. We're skipping it, and now we have all this data. Should we even fight that, or is that just part of the new reality? AI needs data of workers, so we're going to surveil workers. Full stop. I'm just making a bit of maybe exaggerating it a little bit, but it's kind of like I feel a little bit like, okay, we use the data for example, for advantage, but I think there's also the question, like, should we allow continuous worker surveillance, yes or no? I think that's also a question to ask. But how do you see that, like, from a LO? Is there a policy for you? Or are you aware that, like, is this on the table also when you talk?
Yes, of course. There's not a red line in the sand, but of course there is regulation that we should stick to, and I think it's the most important thing firsthand is to try and stick to and make sure that the regulation is actually being followed. I mean, we see time and time again that in different sectors that employers use the data for purposes that was not decided and agreed. So, I mean, there's so much work to do already in the first place. So I think that we really need to start there. And I hope that with time that there will be, I mean, obviously, this might sound very naive, but I mean, we have no other choice but to counteract and fight it. And it means that trade unions need to be much better at GDPR, for example, and know their rights and claim them. And then, of course, there will always be this trade-off with data-driven systems. Actually, you know, the performance is based on the data, but I think we also have to have a discussion of what data, in which form, and also have employers respect the limits of what it should be used for, and of course in cooperation with the trade unions.
And German, from your side, like, I know that you also, together with Frederik Soderquist, that's now at LO, you did a study of miners, for example, like a mining company and the miners, where there was a really positive case and a positive use case of the location tracking without surveillance. Yeah. And is that then one of the examples you think, like the pro-worker developments, like, and is this the model to follow or to learn from and to really see how can we replicate this?
Yeah, this is an example of what Acemoglu calls the win-win solutions. And of course, they are contingent on certain contextual factors. I'm not saying this is achievable. And maybe
people don't know because I mentioned it, because I read about it, but you maybe explain a little bit what happened with the miners.
Yes, it's a study that I did with Frederik Soderquist, a colleague who's an economist at LO now. He would be here if he wasn't on parental leave. And what we did was look at co-determination at the local level in a mining company, Boliden. It's a large Swedish mining company. which has a really highly developed automation program. So their aim is to automate as much as possible of their mining operations. Because Swedish companies generally, but specifically in the mining sector, have to compete with high productivity. So they have to all the time keep, increasing the production with the same sort of staff, right? So in order to compete at the global level and keep prices low. So that's one of the main motivations for automating the operations. The other one is security, safety. So they want to reduce harm for miners, right? So
it's a risky job.
It's a very risky job.
Dangerous job.
I mean, it's dangerous and it creates all sorts of health issues. And these two priorities, these two goals, are shared between the employer and the workers and the unions. Both want higher levels of productivity in order to keep the company going and not reducing the workforce, and they want to keep, improving safety. So this is an important, and I think this is also something to learn. If unions and companies can find shared goals, it's much easier to agree on, ways to get there. And what they did specifically, pertaining to what you were speaking about data, so we'd looked at different issues that they bargained about. One of them was the use and collection of data, because they implemented a system, sort of a GPS monitoring system, you could say. They built a Wi-Fi net all across the mine, and this is a mine which is about 1 kilometer below ground, and in mining shafts that stretch out thousands and thousands of meters. So it's a huge area, and it's very difficult to surveil and to control. And historically, it was very difficult to know which workers were there. They had like lists where people,
traditionally
put their
very
names,
old school.
but there are a lot of mistakes made there, and they didn't know who was where, and they didn't know if there was an accident, they had to evacuate the mine, if everybody was out or not. So this system really facilitated the surveillance of people below ground. It's sort of, you can imagine what Uber does with their drivers, or Foodora, but in a mine, right? So they have like a display with dots where they can see where the miners move. And the miners were very concerned because they said, okay, so we're going to be surveilled when we go to the bathroom, or if we stay too long for lunch, or if we move in a part of the mine where we're not supposed to move, but we think that we should be there because we know the work better. So they made a local agreement, which is possible in the Swedish model, a local collective agreement, regulating the use of the data. So the company is allowed to collect data, positioning data through this Wi-Fi system, but it cannot be identified to a specific worker. So all these dots on the screen are just number tags, and nobody knows which worker is behind the tag. It's only possible to unlock the system in case of an emergency, which could be a crime or an accident, and then only with approval from a union official, the union representative. So it usually, basically never happens. And it's also regulated how the data can be used. So it cannot be used to measure individual productivity. So they can't, say you're getting a pay increase because you produce more, minerals than this guy or girl. And there are a lot of other things that were negotiated. So that shows that it's possible. But this is, again, a sector where unions and the employer have very important shared goals, where union density is really high. More than 90% of the workers and white collars in the union are members of unions, where there's a long tradition of constructive relations between the employer and the firm. So this is not typical for all sectors. So getting something like this in, let's say, for Foodora's drivers, which are covered by a collective agreement, maybe it's not that easy. So this is something that we also have to, and this is why this concept of socio-technical systems is important, because it's not only that factors differ, but we have to consider that factors differ. Sometimes, it's not, you can't just wave a magic wand and create the same social and economic factors in food delivery than in mining. You have to work with what you have and sort of maybe long-term try to shape factors for the better, but understand that we have to have different sort of solutions for different sectors, I think.
I was looking at the time, and I think we have to wrap this up, but I think it's very interesting to see that this win-win, it's not only like a slogan, but really like in real life it exists. but it exists only in some like the exception sectors, I would say, and we would see like we would want to see the same. Like when in the warehousing, we have a long way to go, and it will be very hard also showing the data that to achieve that. I want to thank you, Thea, Linda, and German for your time. It's also time for a coffee break. We have a small coffee break with after that a roundtable, which is more also about the policy and regulating the technological developments in the Swedish model. So we have a final part afterwards. And then on the end of the day, we have a reception with some drinks. So please stay around as well. After the coffee break, there's a final part, not very long. And at 4:30, we have a reception for anybody who's still around to have a drink together. So please, the coffee is served in the hallway. Thank you. So thank you all for staying around. It's already a long afternoon, but I will assure you, you won't be disappointed with this last part of the discussion, and also with the networking afterwards. I think it already started now in the coffee break, but we will have more of that later. I'm introducing the last panel. It's a round table on regulating digital technology in the workplace and the possibilities of the Swedish model. It's very much in line with what we discussed earlier. We have very concrete examples after the keynote, and then we had concrete examples. But now we can talk a bit more also about like how should we regulate these challenges ahead, or how should we operationalize the challenge that was to find the win-win situation. We have three speakers in the panel. It will be moderated by Simon Winge, that you saw before, Ivana Bartoletti, expert on AI and gender rights of the Council of Europe, cybersecurity and privacy executive value at Virginia Tech. And Maya Feestad, senior policy advisor at the European Policy Center, and also former state secretary of health in Sweden. And Goran Arias, president of SACO, the Swedish white collar organization. I don't know, it's the Academic Central Organisation. So I'll leave it to Simon. Good luck.
Thank you so much. And I know these people, so I will get as much said as during the last panel, I think. And I also have some room for you to ask questions during the last 15 minutes. So if you think of something smart, then you will have a mic. But I will start at least. Welcome. And I think you can, Maya, what are your impressions after this? I mean, you've done research on this, and you've written a book on this, and you also, I mean, you've discussed this with Acemoglu. What are your impressions?
It's interesting when we have the opportunity and the privilege to have a Nobel laureate that sort of speaks to us, and now I call ourselves us as sort of Swedish Friends of the Union and International Friends of the Union. But there are a lot of things that Acemoglu points at that are really I wouldn't say revolutionary, but they're rather controversial, and I really appreciate that, Nobel laureates. I think his strong focus on institutions is really interesting. I've been sort of been a little starstruck, to be honest, by Professor Acemoglu, as one is when you meet someone that is a book to you, right? That you read all these books and you meet the person. But and I was really impressed, I must say, by his Nobel speech yesterday. I thought that was a really thought-provoking and interesting piece. And I liked the interaction between him and Magdalena. I wasn't in 100% agree with everything he said, but which was also interesting, I think, because that's where the interesting discussion starts, right?
Thank you. And you can develop some of that later. And Ivana, you wrote recently that, I quote, "We are sleepwalking into a future written by algorithms which encode regressive bias into our daily lives." You write this in the book, An Artificial Revolution. So can you tell us a bit more on how this links to today's topic?
Yeah. No, I think it was covered really well, and that by everybody today. So we have seen over the last few years a good AI, which has been brilliant. If I think about the AI which is used, for example, to support children with disabilities, with autism, the AI this is used for precision medicine in hospital. There is a good AI. And there has been a bad AI over the last few years. AI has always existed for decades, but of course with the power of computation and data, the availability of data has become really popular over the last few years, and then ChatGPT and those similar tools which have entered our life. When I say sleepwalking is I do believe that we are at a watershed moment in the relationship between humanity and technology. And I am a very firm believer that AI can bring enormous opportunities. I work in AI, I work for one large tech company as the AI governance officer, and I believe that AI can really bring a lot. But it's not going to happen unless it's governed properly. And when I say we are sleepwalking, what I say is that algorithms that are used these days to make decisions and predictions about human being, if they're not governed properly, and by this I mean, if we do not work on the data that we put in, if we don't prepare the right data sets, if you don't define the right parameters, if we don't have an inclusive workforce to shape and build and construct these algorithms, we are going to have technology done to us, because these systems are going to automatically softwareize the existing inequalities that we have in society and turn them into predictive technology, thus crystallizing the present, which is not great, into the future. And done it automatically with little ability from us to say, hey, this is not what I want. So this is a watershed moment to me, because AI is far more than being a technology. It's a social, economical tool, has to do with geopolitics. So to think about AI just as technology is misleading. So the way that we address this is through public debate, is by owning this, is by everybody getting a voice into all this, and of course by regulating, but we don't come to this because I believe AI is already regulated.
Thank you. And Göran, you are president of SACO, so you organize members that see both good and bad AI, I would say, like physicians, teachers, social workers, etc. Can you tell us a bit what they see and what you see in this?
Well, thank you first for having me here. I think it's a great opportunity to speak about AI, because at this moment, I think in the Swedish trade union movement, we are speaking a lot about AI today. And I think we can do it in two aspects. One is as a worker, how does this work as a tool in your work? The other is how are decisions made for human beings in the society when the decisions are made by AI, which we also see, and many of our members in the unions are the ones who are, so to speak, responsible for these decisions made. But generally speaking, I think we have seen leaps in technology before, of course, and what we have seen is that they many times have brought more jobs, not less jobs. So we are focusing very much on the transition. How should we be in Sweden, and how should these things be governed, and how should they be implemented on the workplaces? We think it's very interesting to speak about human-centered AI to help us to solve many problems that we're facing, such as labor shortage, climate crisis, increased demands for healthcare, and so on. But on the other hand, we see a lot of problems coming as well. And there will be changes in the work life for, I should say, all our members.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you. Did you want to? No?
No,
okay.
Go ahead.
So Maja, you're a politician, and there's been repeated calls for more politics and more policy here. What do you see here? What would you like?
Well, it's so funny you should ask, Simon, because you and me have an article today in Aktuellt-i-politiken, aep.nu, because, and that's sort of, we formulated this sort of just aside to sort of have a starting point for a discussion. What is AI policy and what is the social democratic policy for AI? And to be frank, I don't think we've been very good at tech policy from the social democratic or from the labor movement side. I think we've been we've been involuntarily we've been hesitant to engage in the discussion. We have been afraid. It's also, I think, there's an aspect as a politician, you don't want to seem stupid, right? You don't want to comment on fast-moving movements. You don't want to comment on technology because it's easy to not understand and say something stupid, and then you're a joke on internet forever, like some politicians we know are. But it's really time to step forward, and I think the political parties have not really done their job. But I think now is the time. I think it's a very interesting time to initiate that debate.
So one of the points in this article then is this trope we hear all the time that US innovates, the Europe regulates.
Yeah, did you hear that Acemoglu brought that up a little bit? I was a little bit provoked, actually. That was one time I was like, I'm gonna stop being his greatest fan. I'm just gonna be his second greatest fan from now. But I think I'm very provoked by this fake dichotomy that innovation stands against regulation, and that we need to stop regulating because we can't innovate. I mean, for example, we regulate the velocity of cars in streets. That probably diminishes the innovation of fast motors a little bit, but nobody says we should get rid of any restrictions on velocity. And there's so much innovation being done within regulation or thanks to regulation. And I think that's important. There are powers that do not wish us well, that pushes this narrative that innovation and regulation are opposites. And we must not buy that. And we often do it. I think that we can see this sort of this verbal figure a lot in the things that we express as well. So let's be careful.
Yeah, and I heard also you, Ivana, you have reacted on this trope. EU regulates, and even then China replicates, some add, I don't know.
Yeah, so. I mean, there is some truth in the sense that, so Europe, of course, lags behind in terms of innovation, but the issue is to understand what we want. Obviously, the priority, of course, we don't have Alibaba or we don't have Google, we don't have the large tech platforms. So this is an historical thing. But the reason is not regulation. The reason is not, we have to be very careful in thinking that the reason why Europe lags behind is purely because of regulation. There is a problem with regulation, though, and I think we have to be very clear about it. The problem that we have with regulation is the fact that we are not acting as one Europe. So what is happening to companies when they are in the EU is that you will find that every single European country will have a different interpretation on the very simple matters, even, for example, what constitutes personal data. This is really problematic. If we want to leverage the regulatory power of the European Union, which is not the only power that we need to, and I do believe that we need to have more innovation, that we need to have more risk attitude in companies, that we need to have more investment, and we need to reform the way that we do investments in Europe. But there is an issue about how we are going to implement this regulation. Now, one thing I want to say, because I'm polemical, and I can't avoid being polemical with a Nobel Prize winner, so I've got to say this. Be careful, and that this bashing of the general data protection regulation is extremely risky. If there is one legislation in Europe that is going to protect every single one of you as citizens and employees, as patients, against the harms generated by algorithmic decision making, is going to be privacy legislation. There is now, and this is the very reason why everybody is starting to bash in this legislation. Because we know very clearly, and in fact, AI is already regulated. It was even before of the European AI Act. But unfortunately, AI has been an excuse to bypass existing regulation. Human rights law applies to AI. Copyright law applies. Consumer legislation applies to AI, privacy, non-discrimination, with all the limits that they may have. But AI has always been regulated. This is why I've always been a little bit reluctant into jumping into more regulation. The European Union approach, which is based on risk, is based on regulating the products before they hit the market, which basically say if we produce something which has AI in it, it has to be safe according to existing product safety regulation within the EU. So actually the European AI Act, is it a big change in the landscape? Not really, not really. Because what is going to be really significant for artificial intelligence is going to be the existing legislation that we have in place. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have to be really careful into saying AI is regulated in Europe. Well, actually, AI is regulated in the US because in the US states, they have privacy laws. In the US states, they have consumer laws. The FTC in the US has been fantastic at looking at the harms of artificial intelligence. So if we see regulation purely as the regulation of AI, you can't regulate AI. It's like saying I'm regulating mathematics. You can't. But what you can regulate is you can apply existing legislation to what you're already doing. So let us be careful and not ourselves fall into this trap. And when somebody says to you, regulation of AI, you say, yes, of course, privacy. Yes, consumer legislation already applies. So we're not reinventing anything, and it's really important that we say this, because otherwise we look like the ones who are going to regulate everything, which is not in this case, maybe in other cases.
And we saw this a little bit with the internet, right?
Yeah.
As well. When the internet came, there was all these internet philosophers that were on TV saying like, oh, we have to have all new laws. This is an entirely new world. I'm like, we can apply copyright law. We've had copyright law for 100 years. Yeah. So I do agree. I also think it's interesting you're pointing to sort of the AI Act, both, I mean, that we have an existing regulation and like, let's start with following existing regulation, but also that there are a number of points that the AI Act does not regulate, that can be meaningful to discuss. And I was thinking the interesting example made by Germán Bender in this previous panel is about following mine workers with sort of positioning and GPS positioning, which is, it's interesting, that can of course be sort of regulated by agreements or local agreements, but in when and where should it also be protected by legislation? Possibly not always. I mean, there's a difference between what is risky and what is questionable nudging, and I think that would be an interesting sort of thing to discuss if we have the time.
I think it's the same way of speaking you can apply also when you're going to implement AI on a workplace, because then we have systems. It's not like buying a new typewriter or a new computer or something like that. This is a new way of working, and then we should do it the way we do it in Sweden. We should have information, we should have negotiation, and then we should have agreements on how this should be done. And I think that's puts in, for us as unions, we have to learn how this works so that we can have efficient negotiations about how it's going to be implemented on the workplaces.
Because one point Acemoglu made was that sometimes when we do algorithmic management or AI, etc., we lose the tacit knowledge that's in that the worker has. So can you tell us a bit more about this, Daron?
Yes, I think it's important to think that AI, I'm not so afraid that they should take all the jobs, because there is, as you say, a kind of knowledge that you have on the workplace when you work together with other people, and I think that is very hard to get into these AI systems. So I think it's very important, and I'm not, as I said, not very worried that AI should take all our jobs, but the jobs will be different. And I think that we have to think about in what way this will affect all the workers and how they should get the chance to transform into the new kind of work that I think this will be, and not lose these kind of special knowledge that you have in the workplace, which I think is very important.
And you say all workers, because some of the case studies today have been for blue-collar workers, but you say all workers.
Oh yes, I think that I can't see any work for our members who have an academic degree that shouldn't be affected. I think perhaps some still think that, well, that we are doing, that's so very special, so that won't be affected. But that was a couple of years ago. Today, I think that everybody will more or less be affected by the introduction of AI on the workplaces.
Can I ask Daron a question?
Please.
You tell me to shut up when you get
No,
tired. No, I think we've been discussing particularly, I mean, are the robots stealing our jobs? I think that's particularly a discussion that has been going on for long. I think what was so interesting about the presentations today was specifically algorithmic management and surveillance, and I think beautifully portrayed by the researchers here that surveillance is not a blue-collar thing.
No.
But do your members express a fear of surveillance, or is it more of a opportunity-based sort of approach to the AI revolution?
I think it's both. I think when I speak to the unions in SOCO, some of them are very positive about this. I think no one is against it, but some are more skeptic. And I think that you should be positive to it, because I think there are a lot of interesting things, and this could help very much. But I think you should be skeptical about how this is used at the workplace. You should, of course, you don't want to be surveyed all the time. You have to have some kind of free space as well. So I think that's one of the things that you have to think about when implementing this. And as I said, I think it's important that the employers don't see this as just a work tool, that we just say that now we're going to use this equipment to do the job. This is a change of the whole work situation, and therefore it has to be negotiated, which I think is absolutely crucial for doing this in a good way.
I'm thinking that sometimes the distinction between surveillance and sort of friendly nudging is difficult to do, because I'd love a little pop-up window saying like stop scrolling 18th century feminist literature and continue doing your job instead. And that can be useful. It was discussed a little bit here in the previous panel, for example, emotional recognition, which the AI Act has been pointed out not to be used, but there's also sometimes the distinction between emotional recognition or friendly nudging from an employer can be a little bit tricky to do.
As it is from your boss as well, you can say the same thing about your colleagues. Is it a friendly nudge?
Is it hostile nudging?
Yeah. So I think, as you said, I think the rules, they are here already. How do you work on the workplace? How do you apply it on the workplace? And I think we should use that as well when you use AI.
Yeah.
So we recently had an AI commission here in Sweden, and it was very big on promise and low is not at all concrete. But one of the examples from public sector where AI will have a big role is scanning, X-ray pictures, and which to me sounded like a quite old example. But also then I read you, Ivana, you actually said that this algorithm is based, I quote, on low-paid work in another country. That's sort of the basis for this AI scan, which is not something at least I knew about. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because AI, when we think AI, you think of Silicon Valley, right? And you think about the cool people in Silicon Valley. And in reality, AI is very much, I always say artificial intelligence is neither artificial or intelligent. We've got to be clear about this. It's not artificial because AI is made by humans. It's made by humans in the sense that is done by people who input data, who train the systems, and often the people training the systems are low-paid workers in other parts of the world. And of course, as a trade union movement, it's important that you bear this in mind. Right? Training these algorithms is, if you think about the algorithms that are the ones that need to identify whether there is a deep fake porn image or there is a violent image or hate speech. These are people who've got to spend 12 hours a day looking at these photos and say, yes, this is violent because of this. And these people get, after 6 months, they're completely traumatized. These are humans. So a little bit of clarification is really important. We're not talking about something magic. Right? We're talking about something created by human beings, trained by human beings, trained with data which is just the mirror of society that is out there. Therefore, there's no neutrality in this data. The parameters are chosen by human beings. So there is nothing but human than artificial intelligence. And it's not intelligent either, in the sense that it uses an intelligence that is very different from ours. Artificial intelligence, I mean, I use these systems all the time. I live with these systems. In the sense, for example, I do a lot of, like, sometimes I have to get into areas which I haven't done before, or sometimes I have to prepare for a lesson. I teach privacy and machine learning. And sometimes I need to look at documents, and until a year ago, I would have looked for the entire, like, sort of academic database. Now it's different. Now I say, can you search me the documents with this and create me a page with all the references and the main concepts for each publication, right? For example, if I have to deliver a presentation, I would say, for example, look, these are the data for the next 10 years. Can you find me trends, the ones that I cannot see with my human eyes? But it's a different kind of intelligence. My intelligence is consequential, right? It's consequential. The machine's intelligence can work with you, but it's not the same thing. So it's really important that we sort of, the biggest risk with AI is not algorithmic management. The risk bit of AI is hype. Hype. The fact that we are thinking that is fantastic, that is going to solve the problems of the world, climate change, is not. If anything, because AI has got a huge environmental footprint. Massive data centers, they consume a lot of energy. So what is AI going to do for us and with us? It's going to help us simplify a lot of tasks. It's going to accompany us in doing tasks that we could find mundane, that we could find boring. It's going to power drones. It's going to identify precision medicine. It's going to do a lot of tasks that, if used properly, can make us more productive. And again, this myth of productivity. I say this even working in business. AI, that we have not reached the level of productivity yet. Okay? At the moment, we invest a lot. But now, what is the role that I see workers doing here? I mean, Daron said something, probably the best thing that he said, who knows the company? Who knows the work? It's the workers, okay? So, who is going to define how AI is going to be used in a business? Use cases. Get the workers to propose it, to the lived experience. That is going to enhance productivity, not the glamour of a product coming from the outside saying we are going to increase productivity by 50%. That's not going to happen. It's the workers within the companies who can say, actually, I have to do this. Can AI do this for me?
It's almost like consultants, isn't it?
Similar, honestly. I mean, we have to really simplify all of this, because otherwise it becomes this sort of magical thing that is going to either destroy all our jobs or making our lives so beautiful that we can just sit by the pool and have a drink and AI is going to do everything for us. You know, no, it's not. And we are in a moment where we can shape all of this, so long as, and I say this is really, to me, is the most important thing, and that's the reason why I'm here, so long as the ones shaping this are not only the big companies running the products. That is the main problem. That is the main thing. So it's really important that we use this moment to shape how we want to use it.
Thank you. And I look out to the floor now. I mean, I have all these questions, but if you have something...
Because there's a lot of questions, and 20 pages.
Exactly. So you can raise your hand, but before Jared gathers, so there's no one, you're all... there's one, but let's do a few.
I hold the mic.
But so please present yourselves and to whom the question is referred, please.
Hello, I'm Lauri Finer. I'm from Kalevi Sorsa Foundation. We're a Finnish progressive think tank. Maybe you can choose who wants to answer. It's probably for all of you or one of you if you like. So my question is about ownership of technology, because I think it's a problem in Acemoglu's book and also in his speech is that he doesn't discuss the question who owns the technology. Do you think it's sufficient that we regulate to kind of direct artificial intelligence and technology, or do we also have to think about who owns? Is it oligarchs in Silicon Valley or pension funds in the Nordics? Does it matter?
Thank you.
That big elephant in the room, you're right. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. My name is Victor Berhards. I work at Unionen, which is a white-collar trade union here in Sweden, as a policy analyst. And I was thinking on the automation and work that you've been touching a bit upon, and others as well. There are, as I see it, sort of natural positive bottlenecks, if you will, because at least in the Swedish labor market context, so many of the employees are specialized. So if you automate 10-15% of their work, it's going to be the 10-15% similar work tasks for them, meaning that you have a natural resistance towards transferring automation into layoffs, because the company still needs all of these people to do what they're experts in. So I wonder, what you think, how would the union strategy look like to enter that 15% or whatever that is? How do you, as a union, proactively argue for sort of developing an innovation within that space?
Thank you. And we have two more. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, my name is Margareta Eklund, working with international projects. I would like to ask Ivana, can you develop a little bit more? I work with equal opportunities and diversity in my projects. How could you see the impact of AI related to the new scenario we can see? Thank you.
So let's do
one more maybe, and then...
Okay, one more, sure.
Okay. Hi, my name is Heidi Bang. I work for the Norwegian union Negotia. I was wondering about one of the sort of through lines through several panels today has been about shaping the narrative around AI and impacting how it's used through the narrative. And the current narrative is shaped by tech giants, and that's because they know the technology. So obviously we're not going to be able to send all our politicians and all our union reps through a 5-year master's program in IT. So how can we change the narrative and change how we think of AI without having the expertise, because that's not realistic.
Thank you. So I'll start with Daron, and then we'll go this way.
Okay, I'm not sure about the first question. I can't answer that. I think what you took up here, how to use the workforce in place when some of the work can be done by AI. And I think that's a very tricky question, but I think we have to think a lot about it because well managed, I think this could make a better productivity at the company. If it's used in the wrong way, I think that could be layoffs and perhaps layoffs for the wrong people. But I think the transition when you are going to implement some kind of AI system at the workplace, I think doing this in the right way, having the negotiations with you or we or some of the others, and giving the workers the right competencies to use it in a very smart way and in a good way, as we have been speaking about earlier. So I think it takes a lot of thinking, and don't haste too much in it, because I think that's also a risk that we do it too fast.
Thank you. Maya?
Thank you. Many good questions at the same time. Does it matter who owns technology? Yes, it does. And thank you. That's such a good point to make. And I mean, we've been discussing this many times during history, of course. And whereas we, as a social movement, see the place for private actors, let's not be naive. And I think that goes for the last question as well from Nagosha, that there is a narrative of elitism, and that is not new. I mean, we have been facing that narrative for 100 years, and let's not buy it. We do not need our politicians to be IT engineers. We need the IT engineers to sort of create explainable AI. At the same time, we also need technological expertise at the hands of politicians and also at the hands of municipalities who are in procurement processes, because that is often the problem, that official actors are weak in knowledge or money or power, and the commercial actors in this field are incredibly powerful. And that is, of course, what the labor movement have been dealing with for many, many years. But there are a few very powerful actors within the digital commercial fields. They are very influential. They're politically influential. Let's not be naive about that. But it's also important to not describe it. And thank you for pointing that out, that you need a bachelor degree in IT to be able to even be a decision making. That is false. And also for a second point here, that is also something that I think Acemoglu points out interestingly, is that for us, I mean, if we listen to Magdalena Andersson, for example, it feels self-evident that, we need to invest in education and we need to, everyone needs to learn about AI. That is not going to happen by itself. I mean, a lot of private actors will push the idea that, we can stop investing in people because we have AI. Obviously, do they need to read and write? And whereas that can sound like a dystopian future, that is a real future that we have to push for, the idea that we need to educate people in AI.
I think it's very important about the narrative that we don't let experts own the narrative. It's one parallel is that I think there's an old say that war is far too serious business to leave to the militaries.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's the same here. You can't leave very serious changes in the society just to be helped by the experts. The politicians and others must be a part of the change.
Ilona?
Yeah, so I mean, every time we talk about this, the biggest elephant in the room is competition. That's the problem we're facing. Now we have, and it's not a problem that we're facing in Europe alone, we're facing this everywhere. Europe has been, with the Digital Markets Act, there's been a very strong, this is not about limiting, it is about creating the best products and making sure that if there is an alternative to a product that we have now, that product is able to hit the market. That's the problem we're facing, right? So it's something that in the US they're experiencing, in China they're experiencing, the entire world is facing and grappling with issue of competition, because that is the big elephant in the room that we have. The fact that we have a concentration of power into the hands of very few companies, which is not healthy for competition. The same way that every time I talk about privacy, I say we can't talk about privacy without talking about competition. Although they're very different disciplines, privacy is about human rights and competition is about well-functioning markets. Nevertheless, these companies, they decide, and they call them walled gardens. They decide what happens, and if you think about the fact that we're using them all the time, what happens with our data? First point. Second thing I wanted to say is this. The impact on women and gender, is massive. And I'll tell you a very short story just to... I asked one of these products to tell me a story about a boy and a girl who were in the last year of high school, and they're deciding what to do when they grow up. And ChatGPT said to me, well, yes, once upon a time they were talking, the boy and the girl, deciding about where to go to university, and the boy said, I'm going to study engineering. And the girl said, I'm going to study art because I do not understand numbers. Now, why am I saying this? Are you surprised? Tell me, are you surprised by this?
No.
Why? Because these systems are trained on data which is out there. So what is the risk to women? That if we do not consciously, politically and socially decide to use AI to change the reality, what is going to happen is simply that AI is going to perpetuate and code what is now the reality into predictions. Now, people will hit back at you and say, but humans are biased. They have prejudice. Why should AI be different? And you answer, when they say to you, you answer, well, because I can challenge a human, but I cannot challenge a machine. So once these stereotypes that we have in society now are coded into the algorithms, they are hard to challenge, even if they are transparent, because actually transparency doesn't mean much, because you are not a coder, you're not going to be able to analyze the data within it, right? So that's the risk that happens to women, to gender, to minority, is simply the replication, softwareization, and the coding of the reality as it is now into the systems. So what happens is that you have women who receive less credit than men. What happens is that on social media you will have products that to clean the house being served more to women than to men, or jobs that pay less being advertised to women than to men, because traditionally, that is the problem, okay? The last thing that I wanted to say is in relation to the narrative. Now, the narrative is important, but again, please, they will complicate it to you because they don't want you to get involved. And AI is not complicated. Trust me. I mean, I learned how to code at the age of 40, so that means everybody can do this, but I don't mean that you need to learn how to code. But AI is far more than technology. People can get involved into this discipline without knowing how to code. It means that you can challenge a decision made by your local authority. You can ask for things to be explained to you. You can teach and have an approach which is not by believing, but by distrusting. Not because you don't love it, but because if you distrust, you challenge. If you challenge, you learn. And also, if you learn and if you challenge, you can also help improve these technologies. Not that we have to work for free for the big tech, but what I'm trying to say is, it's really important to challenge this narrative that here is AI, here's the expert, it's not like this, because AI is far more than technology. If I say to you, the data is out there, it's ingested into this machine, it replicates the stereotypes, it's not difficult. You don't need to be a coder. You can go to a public sector organization that you're using and say, use the GDPR and say, show me where my data is. You have the laws. We have it. Right? So let's challenge this. In trade unions movement, challenge these systems. It's very important. It's very important to challenge them. And we have the tools already to do that. And so this is not a distrust because we don't want to use this tech. I'm a big fan. But because we want to shape them. So distrust by design is something that I strongly believe in. I mean, for as much as I like it, I didn't invent it. It comes from two academics, one in Brussels, one in New York, and they really believe into this, which I think is really important. So I always teach, even the employees at work, my company has got 260,000 people. And we train 225,000 people in AI. Train them. This is how it works. This is how you can challenge. If you challenge it, I give you bounty points. If you say there is a mistake, you are rewarded, not punished. It's really important. So one of the things that I would like to see in the trade unions research, for example, is how we can create this rewarding mechanism for employees to really, and how can take bounce points, whatever it is, but how can we create these systems that reward a little bit of dissent.
Thank you, Ivana. And I see you getting ready for drinks here, so I won't open up the floor again, but I will give you, Göran and Maja, the last chance for a short impression you want to leave everyone with when they go to sleep tonight.
Yeah, go to sleep tonight, yes.
Ask ChatGPT, can I sleep tonight?
Ask it if it's possible. Well, I think you should be positive on this. But you should be a little bit skeptical on how it's used. And as you said, challenge this. And I think that we have a task to give the tools to our members how to challenge it and how this is going to be implemented on the workplace. I think these things are crucial for us as unionists.
Well, I think I would say that technology is power. And power is what we've been dealing with as a movement for many 100 years, or 100 years at least. And we can do this. So let's not be it's difficult we shouldn't resign sort of in the challenge of dealing with this kind of power. But it will not happen automatically. It's not a self-driving force. The distribution of wealth, as Professor Acemoglu points out, will not automatically be just and fair. We have to make it just and fair. And that is also a great task for the labor movement. 100%.
Thank you. Göran Arias, Maja Fjellstad, Ivana Bartoletti. And you can challenge them outside yourselves over drinks. So give them an... Thank you so much.
So we are coming to the end of the program. We have one final speaker. So with me on the stage is Owen Abteheugel, Vice President of FEPS. Where you have the closing remarks.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to speak for a very long time, but it's good to wrap
just
up.
An hour or so.
Just an hour. I wanted to say a few more things, though, from FEPS, more from an operational perspective, because I heard a lot of things that were mentioned, also when it comes to tech policy, digital research. We have a lot of publications. The book of Ivana, there's a book that she wrote for FEPS that's also available, even free of charge. Maybe it's already sold out. Maybe they took all the copies. But there is a book, and all of our materials on the website of FEPS, feps-europe.eu. So you can learn a lot about digital policy. Owen, the floor is yours.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm not going to be another speaker, but I just want to say goodbye. And I wanted to remind you that you took part in the final event of a 2.5-year-long process among many think tanks in the Nordic countries. This all initiated by SAMAK and Jan-Erik Søstad in 2022, when we started this project, the digital project, as we say in Brussels. And I think it's not by coincidence that it happened here in the Nordic countries, where trade unionism is advanced, and also there is a certain affinity to innovation and not an adversity to innovation, which you find in plenty of other European countries. So a word on FEPS, which is behind this initiative. FEPS is a think and do tank in Brussels of the progressive family. We're a member organization. We have 43 members at the moment, think tanks and academic institutes, 25 observer members in the EU countries and a little bit beyond, but only in Europe. And FEPS follows a principle that we try to be useful for our member foundations. And I think this particular program, the so-called digital program, as we call it in Brussels, is maybe a good example of being useful to concrete organizations like trade unions, for example, who can make use of the research which was made. And there's plenty of stuff in the basket, so to speak. If you're interested, you can consult our website and see what we have done on digital in the last 2.5 years. It's going to be a continued priority because I think we are all aware of the fact that digitalization will further shape our lives. It will shape our lives, our work life, every aspect of our life. So we will continue, and we invite all our partners to continue cooperating with us. I think there was an interesting remark by the Nobel Prize laureate when he said that the bread and butter unions are not well prepared to face challenges like this. I would share this view very strongly. So it is really important, if you want to be successful in shaping digital future, that you have unions which have a political approach, which care about working conditions and have a more holistic view in society, don't care only about immediatist and salary-oriented issues of their members. And that's obviously what we have in Sweden, but also in the Nordic countries in general. You probably know that this is not always the case in Europe. I mean, there are different trade union models in the very European Union, where unions play a totally different role in some of the southern countries in the European Union. So, we figured in Brussels that if a union movement can handle algorithmic management, it can be only the Nordics, because they are well prepared, well organized, and with a strong tradition of collective bargaining and autonomy in the negotiation with employers. Now, what we also assist is that with AI advancing and the digital world advancing, that small countries can less and less face the power of the big tech companies. So, and here I would say that you have plenty of even EU member countries who are not taken serious as negotiation partners by Google, Apple, SAP, Oracle, you name it. And here I would say the EU comes into play. And that was also part of the debate between Magdalena Andersson and Acemoglu. I think we should be aware that the European market is still the biggest market in the world, the common market. And also the big tech companies need the European market. And they will also need it in the future because purchasing power over the last couple of years and also in the near future will not rise in developing countries in the global south. I mean, the economic music plays in China, in the US and in Europe, and in some, obviously, emerging economies of the global south. But by and large, the money is where these big tech companies have to sell their goods. And that's the leverage, I would say, the European Union has. And here it is necessary that we come with joint proposals of how to shape something like algorithmic management or digitalization in general. So I would say Europe has almost an obligation, if you look at multipolar and the world in political terms and a globalized economy, to stand for certain values and to defend democratic values in this technological race to where? Where are we going? Yeah? Are we all more happy because we get a faster laptop? Will we be more happy with the next edition of an iPhone? That's not it. Yeah? So, I mean, we have to be clear that this is affecting our whole life and work style. And here I think the European Union, which has many deficits, but should and can play a significant role, and we should try to co-shape this. Thank you.